No one inside that military training hall had any idea they were about to witness something that would quietly follow them for the rest of their lives. It started with a voice, loud, confident, sharp enough to cut through the sound of boots and training drills. Fight a real man. Every head in that section of the hall turned. The voice belonged to the Army's most feared hand-to-hand combat champion, a soldier known for breaking opponents in seconds, and never once being challenged in his own domain. Standing just a few feet in front of him was a much smaller civilian in a simple black shirt. Bruce Lee. Some soldiers smirked, others leaned forward. Most expected this to end quickly. They were right. What happened next lasted less than 7 seconds. But decades later, the men who witnessed it would still describe that moment the same way. Silence first, then shock, then a kind of respect. No one in that room had planned to feel. The facility itself was not built for spectators. It was a secured U.S. Army close combat training hall, a place designed for efficiency, discipline, and controlled violence. Polished wooden floors stretched across the center like a stage, surrounded by reinforced walls lined with training equipment, heavy bags and weapon racks used only by certified instructors. No cameras, no media, no unnecessary noise, only soldiers. Over 200 of them filled the hall that afternoon, uniforms crisp, posture rigid, men selected for strength, endurance, and the ability to stay calm under pressure. This was where elite fighters sharpened their instincts, where hesitation was corrected, where weakness was quickly exposed. Respect here wasn't given through reputation or fame. It was earned through physical proof. Every man standing along the edge of that combat floor trusted one person above all others. When it came to hand-to-hand dominance, their champion. And in a place like this, no outsider had ever walked in and challenged that hierarchy. Until that day, at the center of the hall stood the man every soldier there respected and most quietly feared, Captain Daniel Hayes. The Army's reigning close combat champion. For nearly 4 years, his name had carried weight across multiple bases. Whenever elite units trained in hand-to-hand combat, his demonstrations were mandatory viewing. 6'2", over 220 pounds of conditioned military strength, broad shoulders, thick forearms, and the kind of balance that came from years of controlled aggression. He wasn't just powerful, he was efficient. Every movement he made on the combat floor was sharp, disciplined, and brutally direct. The soldiers admired him not because he talked about dominance, but because they had seen it. He had sparred with decorated fighters, wrestlers, boxers, military instructors, and in every controlled match inside that facility, he had remained undefeated. No one had knocked him down, no one had truly embarrassed him, and no civilian had ever stepped into his space without quickly realizing the difference between performance and real combat. To the men watching that day, their champion represented certainty. If a confrontation happened inside this hall, there was no question who controlled the outcome. And when word began spreading that a visiting martial artist from outside had entered the building, most soldiers assumed they were about to watch a quick demonstration of why military combat was different from everything else. The side doors of the training hall opened quietly. No dramatic entrance, no announcement. A slim figure stepped inside, with the relaxed posture of someone completely unaffected by the heavy atmosphere around him. Bruce Lee walked in without hurry, hands loose at his sides, eyes moving calmly across the vast room. He didn't scan the space like a visitor, entering unfamiliar territory. He observed it, like a man measuring distance, angles, and energy. A few soldiers near the entrance noticed him first. Whispers began, soft, uncertain. "Is that Bruce Lee?" I've seen him before, that's the kung fu guy. Some recognized him from demonstrations and growing reputation. Most did not. To many of the soldiers standing across the hall, he looked almost out of place. Lighter frame. No military uniform. No visible attempt to dominate the room. But there was something unusual about his presence. He wasn't tense. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He simply stood there, calm, balanced, aware, as if the noise, the hierarchy, and the unspoken pressure of that environment had no effect on him at all when his eyes briefly met those of the army champion. Across the combat floor, he didn't challenge him. He didn't look away either. Just a quiet acknowledgement. For a moment, nothing happened. But among the more observant soldiers, a subtle feeling began to spread. Something unexpected was about to unfold. Captain Hayes noticed him standing near the edge of the hall. At first, he continued speaking to the soldiers around him, finishing his explanation of a restraint technique. But his eyes kept drifting back. Finally, he stepped off the mat. The heavy sound of his boots against the polished floor echoed softly as he walked straight toward the smaller man in black. Nearby conversations faded. Several soldiers shifted slightly, sensing something about to unfold. The captain stopped a few feet in front of Bruce Lee and looked him up and down slowly, not aggressively, almost amused. "So," he said, loud enough for the nearest rows of soldiers to hear, "this is the famous martial artist." A few quiet chuckles spread through the group. He circled once, casually. "You're the one teaching movie stars how to fight, right?" he added, the hint of a smirk forming. Bruce remained still, relaxed posture, calm breathing, no reaction. The captain tilted his head slightly. "Ever trained with real soldiers?" he asked. "Real combat isn't choreography." A few more soldiers turned their attention fully now. Some folded their arms. Others leaned in slightly, curious how this would play out. Bruce finally spoke. Voice low, controlled, almost gentle. "Combat is honest," he said. "It reveals what words cannot." The simplicity of the reply made a few nearby soldiers glance at each other. But the captain exhaled a short laugh. "Honest?" he repeated. "In here, honesty hurts." He stepped closer. Not threatening yet, just enough to make the distance personal. "You ever tested that honesty?" he asked quietly. "Against a real soldier?" The tension in the immediate area thickened, not explosive, but growing. Several men now watched without blinking. Bruce didn't step back, didn't step forward, just met the captain's gaze calmly. And the silence between them began to feel heavier than the conversation itself. The shift in atmosphere spread quickly across the hall. Soldiers who had been training moments earlier began drifting closer, not forming a tight circle, but enough to create a wide, quiet perimeter around the two men. Boots slowed, voices lowered, attention focused. Captain Hayes noticed the growing audience and straightened slightly. His posture changed, not just a fighter now, but a champion aware that every movement was being watched. He turned slightly so more soldiers could hear. "You know," he said, projecting his voice, "I've heard a lot about you." He gestured lightly toward Bruce. "Fast hands. Movie fame. People say you're dangerous." A faint smirk returned. "But this isn't a film set." A few soldiers shifted their weight. Anticipation building. "This is where we train men for real violence." The emphasis on those words hung deliberately in the air. Bruce remained composed, hands relaxed at his sides, expression unreadable. "I'm only here to observe," he said calmly. The captain shook his head once. "Observation doesn't teach pressure," he replied. He stepped closer again, close enough now that the distance between them felt intentional. Pressure teaches pressure. The surrounding soldiers were fully invested now. Some curious, some skeptical, some quietly eager. The captain's voice rose slightly. "Why don't you show us something real?" he said. No response. A brief pause. Then, with a half-smile that carried both challenge and certainty, he spoke the words that would stay with every witness in that hall. "Fight a real man." The sentence settled into the silence like a weight. Several soldiers exchanged quick glances. Others leaned forward almost imperceptibly. Because now, in front of them all, the moment had reached a point where only two outcomes existed. Either the visiting legend would step back, or he would step forward. For a few seconds, Bruce Lee said nothing. The challenge hung in the air, heavy and public. 200 trained soldiers watching closely, waiting. Then he took a single step forward. Not aggressive, not hesitant, just deliberate. "I don't fight for display," he said quietly. "Only understanding." His voice carried just enough for the nearest rows to hear. Calm, controlled, almost thoughtful. The captain exhaled through his nose, amused. "Then consider this education," he replied. A few soldiers allowed themselves faint smiles. Most expected what usually happened when outsiders entered this hall. A quick exchange, a demonstration of military dominance, a polite but clear lesson. The captain rolled his shoulders once and raised his hands loosely, confident, relaxed. He had faced heavier men, faster men, more aggressive men. This, to him, looked simple. Bruce stepped onto the polished combat floor without changing expression. But something subtle shifted. His posture aligned. Weight balanced effortlessly. Eyes sharpened with quiet focus. Not tense, not emotional, just precise. Several soldiers in the front rows felt it immediately. A change in atmosphere difficult to explain. The champion moved first, stepping in with controlled intent. A probing motion. Testing distance. Testing reflex. What he saw in Bruce's eyes, in that final half-second, was not fear, it was certainty. The captain initiated with confidence. A quick forward grab toward Bruce's shoulder, a standard control entry he had used countless times. He never completed it. Before his hand fully reached its target, Bruce moved. Not with visible effort, not with exaggerated motion, just speed, clean and direct. A sharp redirection of the arm. A shift in angle so small it was almost invisible. Then a precise counter that disrupted the captain's balance instantly. To many watching, it looked like the champion simply lost control of gravity. One moment he stood firm. The next, his footing disappeared. Bruce rotated smoothly, guiding the larger man's momentum, rather than resisting it. A controlled sweep. A pivot. And in less time than most soldiers could react, their undefeated champion was on his back, not slammed violently, not injured. Placed there. Bruce's hand stopped 1 inch from the captain's throat, close enough to demonstrate final control, far enough to show restraint. 7 seconds. No follow-up strike. No celebration. Just stillness. Then Bruce stepped back calmly, lowering his hand. Silence filled the entire hall. Not the casual silence of training pauses. A deeper one. 200 soldiers stood motionless, trying to process what they had just seen. The captain remained on the ground for a moment, staring upward, not injured, but visibly recalibrating. Then he exhaled once and rose to his feet. No anger, no embarrassment displayed outwardly. He looked at Bruce Lee. For a brief second, the hierarchy of that room felt uncertain. Then the captain gave a small nod. Not casual, not forced. A professional acknowledgement. From one warrior to another. Bruce returned the nod just slightly. No speech followed, no explanation offered. He simply turned and walked toward the exit. With the same calm presence he had carried when he entered. The doors closed quietly behind him. Training resumed minutes later. Commands were given. Movements continued. But something inside that hall had shifted. Years afterward, some of the soldiers who stood there that day would describe the moment in almost identical words. It wasn't the speed alone. It wasn't the technique. It was the feeling that from the instant Bruce Lee stepped forward, the outcome had already been decided, and the man who demanded to fight a real opponent learned in 7 seconds what true mastery looked like. Not loud, not theatrical, just inevitable.